Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Thursday, July the 2nd, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, Let's Go Washington is today turning in boxes and boxes of petitions signed by voters across Washington state in the past several weeks, voters who hope to repeal the newly passed income tax. Meantime, we've got the folks that support the income tax coming out with some very direct attacks on Let's Go Washington founder Brian Haywood. We'll share that with you. The United States men's national team has advanced. There's going to be another match in Seattle on Monday. That next match against Belgium could be played 5 o'clock Seattle time. Super exciting, of course, for the city of Seattle and soccer fans around here. And it turns out fans from out of the area are giving some high praise for Seattle. Seattle people loving the city as they see it right now as well. Some folks have been moved off of the streets and into some housing. We'll see if that sticks. Has some fresh reaction for you from Downtown Seattle Association President and CEO John Scholes. And then my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser with the latest in the redacted, unredacted emails between the Office of the Washington Attorney General and the Secretary of State and backers of the income tax legislation, all that behind the scenes planning. We keep learning more. So stay tuned for today's episode. All right. So on this Thursday, July the 2nd of 2026, backers of Initiative 26-645, the Initiative to the People now, are turning in boxes of petition sheets. You may have seen some folks gathering signatures in recent weeks outside grocery stores or at rest stops. There's a great number of people that have signed those petitions in a very short amount of time. We're going to be heading to Tumwater this afternoon, so we'll bring you updates next week on just how many they turn in. I will be posting an article this afternoon on our Center Square Washington page as well with that update. But they are hoping to turn in well more than they need to qualify. They need about 309,000 valid voter signatures to be certified by the Secretary of State in order to qualify for the ballot this November. And of course, they want to get way more than that because there are some duplicate signers, folks that aren't actually registered voters that sign, and those get tossed out by the Secretary of State's office. So we'll see just how many they end up turning in today. And then the Secretary of State starts pouring over those. They don't look at all of them. They actually take sort of a random sampling and then they extrapolate that out to say, yeah, we're getting about a 82% validation rate. And so based on how many you turned in, we can say you've got more than enough to qualify. But we've been talking for months about wealth flight, business flight. Lots of very wealthy individuals, business executives have said since the income tax was signed into law, we're out of here or we're going to expand to another state. And one of those that we spoke to recently was Janicki Industries, and they are expanding a massive expansion. They're based in Cedar Woolley, and then they have some other locations in the area. But their major expansion plans are right now taking place in Great Falls, Montana, instead of somewhere in Washington state. Janicki focuses on high-end aerospace, defense, marine, space sectors. And again, currently those locations here in Washington include Cedar Woolley and Mount Vernon, Bellingham as well. But now they're expanding in Montana. And I spoke with Janicki's communications and education outreach manager, Nick Lavaca, about their need for more space to expand and why they're not doing it here.
All of those take money. And so we need capital to invest back in. Sometimes the state feels that they can spend the money better, but we feel that we can actually spend the money really well and create jobs that are good paying jobs that provide people with savings, ability to go to college, send their kids to college, buy a little piece of property, or a big piece of property if they like the ranch style, and have those opportunities. So there's a lot of things that other states like Montana and Idaho offer that Washington right now is not offering.
Now, supporters of the newly passed income tax, progressives have amassed quite a war chest for the fight between now and November's election. That's just 4 months away. So you're going to start to see the ads on both sides of this. Certainly, now that the income tax repeal effort is turned in, what's expected to be more than enough signatures today to get qualified for the ballot. But Washington Education Association President Larry Delaney put up a video targeting Let's Go Washington's founder, Brian Haywood. That was put up yesterday. Here's that video.
Washington has one of the most upside-down tax codes in the nation, where the wealthy few don't pay what they truly owe, and the rest of us, nurses, teachers, construction workers, have to foot the bill. Initiative 645 is bankrolled by a greedy hedge fund mogul named Brian Haywood, who moved here from California to shield his massive fortune from taxes. The last time he attempted to give himself a big tax cut through a deceptive initiative, we resoundingly said no. Now, he's at it again, trying to convince Washingtonians that cutting his taxes will somehow benefit us. Once again, he's trying to buy himself a tax cut at the expense of our children, schools, and health care with Initiative 645. Here's the truth. Initiative 645 will blow a $13 billion hole in our state's budget, resulting in devastating cuts to education, healthcare, and human services. Our schools are already struggling with overcrowded classrooms, and middle-class families are feeling the impacts of the affordability crisis. I-645 would take money from our schools and send housing and healthcare costs skyrocketing. But that's not all. It would take away funding from childcare, raise taxes on small businesses and working families, and eliminate universal school lunches. Can you imagine being so greedy that you want more kids to go hungry so that you can have $11 million a year instead of $10 million a year? That's exactly what Initiative 645 would do. Washingtonians said no to Haywood and his greed before, and we're going to do it again by voting no on Initiative 645. Together, we can stand up for middle-class families and send a message that it's time mega millionaires and billionaires pay what they truly owe our state.
So we are headed to Tumwater this afternoon for that turn-in event with Let's Go Washington. So we'll be able to bring you an update in my article to be published on our Center Square Washington page today, and much more to come on this as well. Backers of the um, the lawsuit contending that the income tax is unconstitutional will also be attending that event. So we'll be speaking with Jackson Maynard and Citizen Action Defense Fund. So we'll be able to share an update on the lawsuit as well in our episodes coming up next week. So this is exciting, even if you are not a soccer fan. The United States men's national team has advanced to the World Cup round of 16. So the next match against Belgium is going to be played in Seattle, 5 o'clock on Monday, July the 6th. So super exciting for the city and, of course, soccer fans around here. So some recent fan experience stats show the people that are attending the matches in Seattle love the city. Um, Rating Seattle the best U.S. host city. We're third of all the 16 host cities, behind Toronto and Vancouver up in Canada. They got the 1-2 spot. But Seattle, according to fans, and they put these ratings up, these fan index ratings, and there have been a number of different measurements. But again, Seattle is coming out as the number one of the American host cities. So that's kind of exciting. They say they love the waterfront. They love the stadiums are close to the downtown area, lots of bars and restaurants, all of it within walking distance. Of course, transit has been very successful so far during the World Cup. So Seattle has been shining brightly. And Downtown Seattle Association President John Scholes kind of predicted this a month ago, and he's often a critic of city leadership and crime and anti-business tax and regulation policies. But he says, yeah, the city has been shining brightly. And I caught up with him just before the recording of our podcast today to say, hey, what do you think of how the city is looking during World Cup and the coming match on Monday?
It's been fabulous. I think it's validation that this is a tremendous soccer town. I might go so far to say America's soccer capital. There's great soccer culture here, and we have the things in place for a phenomenal fan experience, and that's what people have taken part in. It's a walkable downtown. Our stadium's close to the core. We've got great transit. We've got great public spaces, and it's been a ton of fun and exuberant to see so many people from around the world enjoy it. But we've had a lot of locals downtown too, and the Friday of the U.S. men's match was the busiest day downtown in modern times that we can measure. So far, so good. And we got one more, and how fortunate we are to have the U.S. men come back through on Monday night. These last couple of weeks, the activity, the people downtown, the people on the streets in bars and cafes, et cetera. But also, I think people are recognizing that there's a real residual return potential here to Seattle, to our brand, to the future of folks that haven't been here before, hearing about what a great time so many people have had and coming here, or folks that were here and deciding to come back and to take in all the things they couldn't take in because they were so fixated on soccer. And we've gotten, I think, well-deserved great press around the country, around the world, and super positive social media content. And I think Seattle's showing off, Seattle's shining, and we're not done yet.
Now, independent journalist Jonathan Cho was in Seattle for the big Pride Parade last weekend. He was with We Heart Seattle's founder, Andrea Suarez, um, pointing out that the homeless drug addicts are still right there in the middle of things. Might not be right down there at the stadium or haven't been talked about a lot, but obviously the tents, as you can see, are very much still right there. So maybe the out of towners are not seeing that, or maybe it's just not making a lot of the mainstream coverage for the overall fan experience. We're going to be going into Seattle on Monday and into the Stadium District. Hope to speak to some fans, both people that are from around here and out of towners, about what they think of the city, what they think of Seattle as the host city for World Cup. So I'm excited to get some of those impressions and share them with you next week. Now, more records obtained by my colleague TJ Martinell with the Washington State Attorney General's office, advising their client, the Secretary of State's office, to release attorney client privileged communications unredacted. They called it a middle ground in response to an appeal that was made by the Center Square. Originally, they sent redacted documents to TJ. He appealed. And then, of course, you've got the AG's office saying to Secretary of State, you should release these unredacted, because they originally, you may recall, provided something like nearly 1,000 pages of unredacted documents related to how crafters of the income tax were sort of working behind the scenes, asking for consult from the AG's office and others as to how to get around the people, how to make sure that there was a referendum proof version of the legislation that passed in Senate Bill 6346, the millionaire's tax. For now, a millionaire's tax of 9.9% on income above $1 million. So here is the very latest in this with my colleagues, TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clauser, with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, here to talk about a recent story of his where he obtained public records from the State Attorney General's office, where the AGO had directed the Secretary of State's office to release attorney-client privilege documents to the Center Square in response to a separate request. TJ, what concerns does this raise around disclosure with these agencies?
I mean, it's difficult for maybe people who are not familiar with how an attorney-client relationship works, but effectively, their communication is supposed to be kept private, confidential, and even though these are public officials, elected officials using taxpayer resources, they are exempt from public disclosure. What happened is I got emails and documents, one of which was unredacted when it should have been redacted, that I reached out to the Attorney General's office for comment on, and they issued a statement to me. So they commented to me on attorney-client privileged communications. And then I received an email from the Secretary of State's office saying, we released that accidentally. Would you, we're requesting that you delete it. Well, I did. I said, actually, I'm not, I'm not going to delete it. Also, you need to give me more records unredacted because your attorney commented on them and waived protection. Attorneys can't waive privilege on behalf of their client, but by commenting on them, they can't claim privilege anymore. And so the Secretary of State's office has issued a statement to me saying that they did not waive privilege. And I asked them if their attorney, the Attorney General's office, gave them permission. Or, sorry, if the Secretary of State's office gave the Attorney General's office permission to publicly comment on these things, and they said we haven't waived privilege. So I can only imagine the conversations that were going on between the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office. And so what happened is the attorneys with the AGO told the Secretary of State's office to release unredacted, release other records under my appeal as a middle ground. And that they're in this really weird spot where they can't claim, they're claiming privilege, but they can't claim privilege because they've released these records to me voluntarily. The Secretary of State's office said they did it in the interest of transparency. The Attorney General's office is saying, oh, it's a middle ground. Well, what does that tell you about the legal position they're in, or in regards to the Public Records Act? It means that when I appealed, I had a legitimate case. The Attorney General's office publicly commented on attorney-client privileged communications without permission from their client. And so that, for people who are not familiar with the attorney-client relationship, there was a book and a movie that came out called The Firm, which is about a young lawyer who works at a law firm that's ultimately, their client is the mob, is the organized crime. And he's trying to get out of that situation. And much of the plot revolves around him trying to do so without violating attorney-client privilege, right? Even though they're the mob, they've got, he has an obligation to represent his clients. And so he can't come out. I understand it's not a fully accurate plot in terms of how attorney-client relationships work. But the whole point is that even if your client is committing crimes, you can't reveal certain things. And so that goes to reflect on the fact that the Attorney General's office didn't tell me we can't comment on these. It's attorney-client privileged. So that's, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and for context for the listeners, all these records were in relation to the state's new income tax and potential legal challenges over the referendum process and other parts of the tax, which has been highly controversial before and after its passage. Our listeners and our readers might see your stories and say, well, thank God that they handed over these records, even though that they weren't supposed to. But at the same time, this whole back and forth with the AGO and the Secretary of State's office kind of goes to show how they're handling the income tax issue, especially their communications and maintaining the state's image around it. What is this back and forth and them coming back to you and saying, oh, no, we didn't mean to give you these records? What does this say about their general position or their approach to defending the state's image?
I think the question to ask, Tim, is, should, I mean, I think it's just a question of the Attorney General's office is the top attorneys in the state, and they don't seem to understand basic. It's like that line from A Few Good Men. It's like they missed that day they taught law school. You don't talk about your client's communications with you.
So in another round of records requests, you also received this form. I think it was from the Secretary of State's office, but correct me on this. But it's essentially this form that they send to people when they've accidentally turned over records that they're not supposed to. Can you kind of tell me about that form and whether or not this is common practice?
Well, apparently it is, because the Washington Association of Public Records Officers has it on their website. It's available to download. So I got it through a public records request, but I also got the link to where it comes from. And I actually talked to the Coalition for Open Government, and they just said they've never seen anything like it. And so I just think that it's fascinating that they have this form, because to be fair, it's a request. But at the same time, I don't understand. I don't understand the point because I get my guess is it's probably not meant to be for media or people who are like watchdogs or investigators. I think it's meant for ordinary people who file a request, get something, they get an official letter from the Secretary of State or whoever saying, "Can you please delete these?" And I get it. They're not ordering you to, which, you know, that would be illegal.
Do they have
So
any legal standing to claw back these records?
Well, this is the part that kind of baffles me. Let's say they said, "Oh, you legally need to turn these over." I just put them on some, I upload it to a cloud or drive and then disperse it to 50 different people. It's now out in the open. This is the year 2026, right? This isn't like 1620 or 1785 or whatever year where, you have the physical copies and copying things are really complicated and expensive and, it can be contained easily. This is the internet. The moment I get a public record to download, I can re-upload it to the internet and send it out to as many people as I want within seconds. So the whole idea that they have some sort of ability to claw back records, no, you can't in any practical sense. Because the moment, if I ever got a letter from any government agency saying, "Hey, you need to delete these records or give them back to us," or whatever it is, first of all, how do I give them back to you? It's not physical. So I just, to me, it's a courtesy letter that they send out just if in the event that something happens with it. And again, these are records that should not be released unredacted. But to get back to your other point, Tim, this really does raise questions of to what extent should attorney-client privilege between public officials using taxpayer resources be kept as confidential as if it was private practice? I think that that's a legitimate question is should we broaden the public records laws to allow for greater disclosure of communications between the Attorney General's office and other public officials where they're giving them advice on stuff that concerns public policy and concerns like taxes, like the whole story did back in April, which was about them crafting the bill to trigger a lawsuit that would cause the state Supreme Court to overturn a ban on progressive income taxes in the state. So yeah, that's something that many people think the public should be able to know is that they're advising their clients to do things that affect taxpayers. So, I mean, as a result of these stories, we might see people pushing that more and more. Who knows, but it really does raise the question because some of this information is very fascinating, very revealing, and provides greater understanding of government. For example, the email with this story was it wasn't an email, it was a comment by Deputy Solicitor General Carl Smith. And he said two things that one, that the court might rule allowing a referendum on the new income tax to avoid dealing with the constitutional question. And this is a former state Supreme Court clerk. And so he would know them. And this is him giving his opinion of how they think and how they operate. The other one was a comment that he was quoting from Solicitor General Noah Purcell saying that the state Supreme Court is as favorable venue as we're going to get. So again, this allows us, the public, to have an understanding of what government officials are saying that we otherwise wouldn't know if these records have been released redacted. And so it is better informing the public about what's going on in this way. So again, I understand how an attorney would say, look, I need to be able to protect my clients' communications. They need to be able to speak with me frankly. A response to that could be, well, great. If you're in the private sector, that's fine, but you're not. You're getting taxpayer dollars. So.
Well, TJ, appreciate your reporting on this issue and all the records requests that you file to get these disclosures from the agencies. For anyone hoping to read those stories, you can catch them at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
So I encourage you to check out TJ's article again on our The Center Square Washington page for more on this. And again, an update with my published article today after the Let's Go Washington signature turn-in signing event that takes place late day here on Thursday, July the 2nd. That's a wrap on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. As always, we thank you for watching. Probably won't get to see you in podcastia world again until next week. I hope you enjoyed time with family and friends in celebrating our nation's 250th this weekend. Happy 4th of July.